Hi, my name is Benedict. I don't do as much of this as I used to do. I used to do a lot in forums and groups and what have you, and got tired of being abused for being too much of a smart ass or whatever. But this song was brought to me, or the second issue that I raise here, I saw myself and had already provided an answer to. But the first issue is something that somebody else brought to me, and they said that in the place where it was raised, all the answers being given were wrong. They weren't 100% themselves, but thought they would come to somebody who's likely to give the right answer. The question was, can I get CV or control signals from a VST and apply it to somewhere in the reason rack? And it seems that ultimately people were going, oh no, well, no, not really. And, well, I'll use the word that the person who brought this to me used, lummoxes, because you can. Here, we have phase plant, we have an envelope shape, and as you hear, this is not a sine wave we're hearing. We're actually listening to Thor. So we're pulling a signal from a VST and we're turning it into a Thor sound. Want a little bit more proof? I did that here and it sounds over there. Right, I'll admit the first thought that I had on this, while it works technically, isn't very good. My thought there was, because I always knew we would have to turn this into audio, was to take audio out from the synth, in this case the donor is phase plant, and I thought, well, if we took the audio out, put it into like audio input to here, and turned it into CV output here, we could assign that to anywhere else that CV works, or internally or whatever. The problem with that approach is that while audio in Reason obviously works at an audio rate, CVs work at a batch rate. So it essentially becomes a sample and hold. So as it hits the batch, it listens to what it's hearing. It goes, here's a value. And then when the next batch comes along, it grabs another value. So a smooth curve becomes stepped, which once we put it back into an audio modulation type situation, it's stepping, therefore it sounds gnarly, chewed up, not cool. Unless that's exactly what you're after, gnarly, chewed up, not cool. So that's not really the best solution. That's what we used to do in the very, very early days and just live with it being, ooh. Reason has, especially if you're on Reason 12, a few audio followers. The audio follower in Sweeper is super. All you got to do is get the sound into here, then you can deadhead it. The only reason I've got the sound available here is just so people can hear this is what Reason is hearing. And you can see that it's actually drawing the shape that we have here. Same. To set it up, you must obviously make your shape that you want in whatever way you want, send it to the audio level of a simple oscillator. You could use a complex oscillator, frogs mating or what have you, but you're going to end up with a lumpy result. Sine waves obviously being the theoretically most perfect way, but harder-edged waves can give you a slightly different kind of a transient effect. There'll always be a slight slowness on transients, but not enough to cause you any particular concerns as such, bearing in mind we are bending the rules of the way the world works. So I'll leave it to you to know how to do this. It's not for me to do that for you. If you do want me to do it for you, I'll be delighted to. This is why you pay a specialist. So we get an audio out. All we want is this level, this shape here, as a volume level. We output that, in this case, to the sweeper, and then we have the sweeper listen to that. These controls do nothing. This is simply listening and drawing it. It's also outputting that to a CV, and that CV is, in this case, coming from the output of the follower to CV1 in, and then I'm routing it to the filter frequency. Woohoo! That could be routed anywhere that has a CV option, including to combinators to do things. So cool. That works really, really well. Particularly the audio follow in here is surprisingly accurate. Look at your edge. That's pretty good. Great. I would question why we would do this though. Simply because Europa has tremendous MSEGs, like really, really uber cool MSEGs. Let's get that to start properly. So we've got both running at once. Why not? So it's a questionable thing to do when we've got access to some of the best things in the business, but nonetheless, it is entirely doable. It's possible that instead of Sweeper, we might be able to use Pulverizer, but I think Sweeper is better. Sweeper is great. It's useful for all kinds of things. So that's one of the questions that was raised. And yeah, I think if you don't know how to do that, you really shouldn't be setting yourself in groups and forums to answer people's questions. Here's the other one. The guy was asking, well, what if I've got a sample and I want to drop it into a sample player? How do I make that come out properly? Well, my first line was, well, just do it. Don't go asking the internet how it's going to work. Just put it in, see what happens. This is what you will get. I grabbed a trumpet sample from the library and just dropped it in. What you will get here, obviously, is as this goes up, the sample plays faster and faster, or slower and slower, and loses some of its trumpetness. Fairly acceptable here. I've turned the loop off. But we do have a slight issue in that the sample runs out faster. So if we wanted to hold a note here, we're buggered. Unless, of course, we turn our loop on. But then it becomes, well, looped, which has some issues. The other option, of course, is to use something like Mimic and then use a cross. But we can hear that comes out really rather differently. No right or wrong, but it's not what we might call musical compared to... Actually, here's one I prepared earlier. So this is the multi-sample. This is the original orchestra sample set. That's just the one sample in NXT and the one sample using a time stretch mode. It's interesting that the vocal was quite different. Now we go back to this, you go, hang on, that sounds really different. And now this almost sounds a little out of tune. It's not. At least I'd be amazed if it is, because I've never had a problem with any of the orchestra stuff. It's actually a really nice sample set, if you know how to process it. The reason being is that when we take a sample and play it back, we're merely playing it faster, as you heard here. In this case, we go, takes that long. Oh, we've got the loop back on again. This is where somebody really should be trying this themselves instead of asking the internet. Runs out in half the amount of time. Runs out in a quarter of the amount of time. So the thing is, we're taking our set of overtones, so our fundamental and our harmonics. We're taking our harmonic series, our partials, And we're just literally moving them in an octave. We're just doubling the speed of them. We've moved everything up by doubling everything. And while it keeps the relationships correct, unfortunately that doesn't match real-world instruments. So it sounds squawky. Not entirely Mickey Mouse, although if it was a vocal or a drum loop it would. But the things that define the instrument, to some extent formants, but in the case of a trumpet we've got a tin tube, and the way that tin tube works will influence each note actually a little differently, not randomly, but it becomes the curve that shapes it. That's the timbre of that instrument. So when we listen to the whole piece going, that goes hard and sharp and weird, and this sounds more natural because each of the samples reflects better what the tin tube does at that pitch. And the time stretching sort of delivers us the same result as straight pitch shifting. It just means that the sample plays as long at each. Plays that long, plays that long, plays that long, but it starts to sound really weird up here. And if anything, it suffers worse than here, because it's fudging physics. It's pulling out a lot of the sample slices and throwing them away. Or when we go right down, it's multiplying and putting slices in that weren't there before. It's just duplicating all the slices. So you end up with a slightly smushed kind of sound. And my answer to him was, well, if you've got this one thing and you're not going to get an actual trumpet with an actual trumpet player who knows how to make it sound nice, then work out how to make that instrument play to its strengths. We're working on the assumption he doesn't really have a trumpet library, and that's absolutely fine. I would probably not use said trumpet library, but then I'd be pulling in this. How do I make this sound nice? Now that sounds so much nicer already. We can assign some level. And then I'd be adding particular effects to match what's going to sound nice. So let's just go with the echo, because the echo is always fabulous. Let's choose a shortish sound. Lots of this, not actually a huge amount of spread. A little bit of pitch there, a little bit of pitch there. Let's put a little bit of drive on it, because there's nothing better than drive in a trumpet. We listen to just reverb space. Now we've created a unique instrument which sounds consistent within itself. If it is playing a little bit sharp, which it might be, then we can just pull it back. So now we've got an instrument that's just unique to itself, but sounds consistent within itself. Obviously, we need to make sure that we understand the piece that we're playing it in. Otherwise, well, we just make something that's, a bit of an atrocity and it won't sound nice. But if we approach this way, we'll get something that plays great. This is how it was done through the 80s. Peter Gabriel, all those guys who got famous for samples and what have you, this is what they did. They simply grabbed what they'd got and then worked out how to make it beautiful. If you think that you're going to be able to turn one sound into this, then, well, good luck with it. It's not going to happen. Rather than asking the internet, get in, learn how to use your instruments by actually trying things, by failing at them, by failing and coming up with something that is special because it's a thing you've done. That's the real way to go at this. Otherwise, if you go, oh, well, I have to ask the internet how to do things, then you're not going to work out how to do your stuff, and you're not going to find those happy accidents that turn into amazing things. All right. Any questions? Ask on down below. If you're offended because I've said something nasty about you or your group or whatever, well, you're in MySpace now, so you can just bugger off. Okay, anything else that I can help you with? Ask on down below.